Okay, so this is a session where we talk about the frequently asked questions regarding packaging compliance, where we want to go through a number of them. And one of the first things which is being asked, what kind of versions of the systems are available? So standard packaging compliance comes with, as we call it, a coverage of the European regulations and everything related to that for food contact. That's the basic part of packaging compliance. We can add different modules to extend it from a regional point of view, so geographical. If we go to the global coverage, then we are talking about the packaging compliance integrated version. This version, as mentioned, covers globally all kinds of regulations related to food contact. Next to that, we can also add an electronic request for information. This relates to the communication which you can do through the system. That can be done by a standard, more email approach. But the e-questionnaire comes with a web form which is being sent to a supplier to complete this. So that's another add-on module to the system, and this e-questionnaire can be set up by the user itself. We can also add, as an additional add-on module, our migration modeling solution, which is also available as a standalone application, by the way. But this can also be integrated into the system. And with that said, then already existing information you have and data you have in the system can be used to do your migration modeling simulations. So these are the different areas. Everything related to starting with packaging compliance comes with mandatory training. And what is also included is an after-sales support. So this package is standard. The rest can be added as an add-on. Another question which comes up, because we're talking about data, you need to fill your databases based and supported by our databases, is how to get the data of the raw materials and products in the system. Also there we have different solutions. The most simple way is taking information from your supplier and adding it manually to the system. Of course, that's a lot of work. Other solutions are more automatically. So from a raw material import perspective, we do have Excel files available, which can help you to do more in less time, but also making sure that you have already data available. So data can be stored in an ERP system, can be stored in an Excel file. We use a standard Excel file upload where we need the data, and based on that, it will be sent into our system, and after approving, it will go as data in packaging compliance. So that is through an Excel file. We can also do more customized imports through an API, and that's of course based on what kind of information do you have available, what can we do with this data, and so on. So that's really pulling directly from an ERP system the data. Of course, it's not creating something for one time. It's a continuous work. Compliance and risk assessment of food contact materials is something you do on a continuous basis. With that comes, of course, changes which come from your suppliers, but also changes in regulations. And these changes, how can you follow up on these changes? That's where we help you out with packaging compliance, where we not only enter and add new regulations to the system and new versions and updates of the regulations, but we also scan your databases to check if this information is available or in your system, if the old version of the regulation is available, and based on that, we will give you an overview of all the products and raw materials where the regulation has been used. And then it's of course up to the user to go back to suppliers and ask, for example, for updated information. And based on that, you can update the raw materials, and then everything related to that raw materials or products or generic raw materials can be updated as well. So it's a continuous flow of updating information and data in the system. We already talked about imports from data, and that was really related to raw materials and products. Other things what we can do is also import supplier and customer information. So company details, contact details in the system. Why? Because we have a communication module in packaging compliance, which makes it possible to communicate with suppliers. So we already touched on this electronic request for information or sending out a kind of email message to your suppliers. But of course, you also want, whenever you have created your legal document from your product, you want to send it to your customers. And that's also where the communication comes in place. So also there we talk about data, which we can import through a standard Excel file. Once again, the same approach. You can add it manually. Also, that's something we discussed previously. So if you already have a database with customers, but you need very quickly to add one, then you can also do that manually. And the third option, again, as mentioned regarding raw materials and products, is also adding this kind of information from suppliers or customers directly from your ERP or an other existing software solution you have already in place where this data is stored. So that's also something we can do and where we can support you. The ways of communicating have been discussed already. Looking at all the different versions of packaging compliance, the communication part with customers and with suppliers is standard included. So even if you have the standard version of packaging compliance, communication is included in the system. And one of the other things is that everybody who is in the supply chain of food contact materials normally has different supply sources for the more or less same raw materials. How to handle that? We can also cover that part in packaging compliance, where we are comparing these, let's call, standard raw materials, which are substitutes from one each other, and taking the worst case scenario. So with that said, using this generic raw material approach, we can cover multiple supply sources. And with that said, making sure that whatever raw material you are using, supplier A, B, C, that still your product is compliant. And that's, of course, a very important thing and makes it easier to cover all these areas. So these were the questions I had. Maybe you have some. Yeah, then I already touched on the raw material information import. I think one of the main challenges is getting the data in the system. That's where everybody is struggling with. But we can also support with that, not in the software itself, but with our services. So that might be also something to address, that to get data in packaging compliance, we already touched on the different options of manual input yourself, import through Excel files, or direct connections. Foodchain ID can also help you with a starter package where we can take information from the documentation from your supplier, which is then being processed by Foodchain ID. And that's something we offer as a package. Standard this starts with taking 50 DOCs from your suppliers and making sure that we extract the data from that and putting the data in the system for you. And with that said, you will also see, based on what you would expect to see. So that's also something maybe to touch on, is that the system also gives you the possibility to have your own, as we call them, compliancy specifications. So you can set up your own rules and your own regulations which you would like to follow up on, which makes perfect sense, of course, because then you can ask that kind of information from your suppliers. So the standard procedure would be setting up your specifications, getting the data from the document. How you can get it in, I already mentioned. And if there are any gaps, so with other words, what I'm trying to say, if there's something not in the document of the supplier, but which is very important, I would say mandatory for you, then of course you need to go back to your supplier and ask that information. So by processing the data, you will see where the gaps are. And also there we can support, if necessary, you as a customer, making sure that you can use our services and even extend that and say, okay, if the information is not there, then you can also help us out to get that information from our suppliers, because we don't know how to do that, or we don't have the time to do that. So with other words, we can offer you resources from our end to make sure that we cover that as well for you and make sure that you have a good start. Because once you get started, then you as a user can start working with the system from a base which has been set by Foodchain ID. We briefly touched on the services we can provide. So looking at the solution, that's already something where we are one of the unique suppliers and companies who have developed such a kind of software, which first of all covers globally, but we can also combine that with our services. And I think that's a very unique way of working, where we can offer not only a solution, but where we can also offer people to support us, to support our customers. So that is very important part, which is, I would say, unique. And also we are supporting, and we have people who are working or coming from the industry. So they know what kind of challenges they are facing. They know how complex it can be. And with that said, we can also guide them how to use our solution. So not only giving them, let's say, a black box, but making sure that we help them with a certain approach. What is the best way for them to use the software? Because that can differ from where you are in the supply chain. It makes a big difference if you are at the beginning of the supply chain, so really at the chemical part. It becomes more complex if you move into the final products. So a cup which has been printed, or a film which has been printed, or a carton box which has been printed. The more complexity comes to it. And with that said, from a compliancy and risk perspective, it's very important that people understand their responsibility. That's step number one. And also making sure that they know how to cover that. So our solution helps them. I would say one of the unique things what we do in our software is that we can, based on information a customer has available, do automated calculations, which also will make sure that the cost which you normally would spend on migration testing to prove that your product is compliant to a certain type of use makes it less costly for a customer. And also coming back to whenever there is a change, then you still know, okay, based on my calculations, I can very quickly check if I'm at risk. And if you don't have that, then of course you can always go to a testing laboratory, but that will keep on spending money on testing, because the testing laboratory wants to, of course, sell their tests. And in some cases, there is no other possibility to do, but try to, again, from an approach perspective, make it work for you, which is as effective and efficient as possible. And that's also where our tool, but also our people can help out. Right. Yeah, one of the things which I might also want to address is the fact that the user of the system is always in the driver's seat themselves, which means that they decide what information they are sharing with the customer. Even though they might have more information in the databases available, they decide what they want to share with the customer. The system always also is a good way of a uniform way of working, especially if you're companies who are part of groups, so different sites all over the world or in a different region, makes the system also a good way to work in a uniform way through a company. And with that said, also from a, I would say, professional approach, it looks very good whenever they get a document from a site in France, which is exactly the same, maybe from a content perspective different, but from a layout perspective the same as the site in Germany. I would say that's also a very important part which I would like to address and which will help customers out. And the system also provides the option to add a lot of detailed information. So next to the flexibility which we have in the system, also the possibility of adding all kinds of information to the system, which is not available for a customer, for example, but which could be an internal remark. And that could also be, and that will be visible for other users of the system who can then see, okay, why did we mention compliant over here? What is the reason? What is the proof behind that? So next to that part, it's very important that you keep up to date with all that kind of information, and by doing it also through internal remarks. So we talked a lot about data, but also the system will offer you the possibility to store documents. And whatever documents you have which relate to your product, which might be a testing report, which might be a formulation you have, can be added to the system. And we have an alert system in our packaging compliance solution, which gives you the possibility to add a valid until date. The system will alert you 3 weeks before your valid until date. And based on that, you will get a message from the system, you should now check these documents. So it might be that you need to do new migration testing. The same for supplier information and documentation. If you have received information, you have added your valid until date, then again, 3 weeks before that, you will be alerted by the system. And that means you need to go back to your supplier and ask for new documentation. All these documents will be stored in the system. Nothing will be deleted unless you do it yourself. And we also have the possibility to add labels to your document. So it's perfectly clear. And again, coming back to a uniform way of working, you can set up your labels and predefine them. And whenever somebody's uploading that, they can say, okay, this is a DOC. So adding the label DOC to it. This is a REACH document. Adding that's free text. You can do whatever you want on that part, but making sure that everybody is using the same labels makes life much easier. Also because you have filter options where you can have a real deep dive into the details and say, well, show me now all the DOCs. And different filter options from a high level perspective, but also very specific on raw material or product level.